This is Josh Cunnings coming to you once again from the Weston A. Price Foundation Wise Traditions Conference of 2012 right here in Santa Clara, California. And I'm talking now with Mr. Gary Cox. Gary, pleasure to meet you.
Hey, nice to meet you too.
And you are the chief counsel, you said?
Technically, it's general counsel.
General counsel to the Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund out of Columbus, Ohio. So, Gary, tell me what it is that you folks do. This is something about, is it legally defending consumers or is it legally defending farmers?
Both. We are a 501c4 organization. I operate out of Columbus, Ohio, and we're a member-based organization consisting of farmers and consumers. We also have affiliate members like buyers clubs, and then we also have members who prefer to get our protections but who don't necessarily want to litigate. The purpose of the Legal Defense Fund is to promote the direct transaction between producers and consumers. And when we have a direct transaction, it's our belief and it's our philosophy that the direct transaction between the producer and the consumer does not require governmental interference. Governmental licenses, permits, sanitation standards, labeling standards, all that stuff. So we defend the right of the producer to make their products accessible and available to the consumer, and also we defend the right and protect the right of the consumer to have access to nutrient-dense food grown in a sustainable manner.
And so some of your clients are big organic farmers, I take it?
They're organic farmers, but they're not big. My clients are individuals. They're not large corporations. They're not large partnerships. They're mom and pops, moms and dads, who have 8 to 10 kids helping them work the farm. So they're very small farmers. They don't necessarily have to be certified organic, but when they apply for membership into the organization, they do certify that they engage in sustainable farming practices and that they are pasture-based rather than grain-based.
You don't have clients coming to you who, for instance, raise battery chicken eggs? It's only like the free range? You mean the people who know how to really grow food and the people who do it right without impacting the land need your legal assistance? Why is that?
That's correct. Those are the people we represent. Those are the members we go after. And why do they need our help? Because government is cracking down on them. If you watch the movie Farmageddon, you'll see in that documentary a whole slew of examples where government cracks down on small family farms, tries to put them out of business because these people are trying to engage in this direct producer-consumer transaction free from governmental interference and harassment, without licenses, without permits, without adhering to labeling requirements and sanitation requirements and transportation requirements, all this kind of stuff. And so these sustainable family farms who are marketing their products directly to the consumer are being faced with search warrants, being held at gunpoint in their family rooms with their children, having their product confiscated, having some of their equipment and machinery confiscated, so they can't even make cheese, let's say, who are the targets of state and federal enforcement actions when the government claims that, for instance, let's say some raw milk cheese was distributed in interstate commerce and maybe one of the samples detected the presence of listeria, so the government would want to come into that cheese operation and shut it down completely, whether or not listeria even exists in the cheese-making facility. So these people are the targets of federal and state and even local health department enforcement actions, which I believe is an effort to squelch and squash this alternative food movement that is rising to protect large-scale agriculture. And so these farmers, they need legal representation. They need a 24-hour hotline. They need access to lawyers who can give them advice. They need access to business materials so that they can incorporate under their state's, applicable laws, so that they can engage in drafting contracts with their shareholders to provide services. And so we provide a whole host of services to our members, including the possibility of providing legal representation in the event they get sued by a federal entity, They can ask for representation as long as what they are doing and their operations and practices are consistent with our mission statement and our purpose. Then we could potentially provide free legal representation to them if they get involved in legal action. Our members, though, have to engage in sustainable practices, which means try to apply organic pesticides, organic fertilizers like fish kelp, engage in cover crops in the wintertime, rotate your crops, have a diversity of crops, not just 1,000 acres of corn or 1,000 acres of soybeans. Use open pollinated seed, do not use GMO seed. So those are the types of practices that our farmers engage in, and if they have livestock, they're not engaged in confined animal feeding operations, they're engaged in pasture-based operations. Rotational grazing for cattle, free-range chickens, this kind of thing.
So Gary, we've all heard about these raw milk raids that have been going across the country, and citizens we've heard are who do this, who engage in sustainable farming, are now in fear of taxpayer-funded men in black squads kicking in their door. I mean, this is language we've heard from concerned farmers right here at this conference. And these are the people you represent. Why do they need protection in the first place for doing things the right way from the federal government? And did you, by the way, are you involved in representing this Rossum case that happened in, I think it was 2010 it began?
Tangentially. Rossum was an entity, a buyers club, headed by an individual named James Stewart, and that case also implicated two other people who were charged with crimes and actually thrown into jail, Sharon Palmer and Victoria Block, and they're known as the Rossum Three. Of the Rossum Three, we represented, the Legal Defense Fund represented Victoria Block. We did not represent James, and we did not represent Sharon. They had their own attorneys.
Why? Because there would have been a conflict of interest?
Potentially. And there were other factors that we needed to look at from an organizational standpoint to determine whether or not James's fact pattern and his issues fit in with our mission statement. Same thing with Sharon Palmer. Although I can't say we have represented Sharon Palmer in other matters that have been brought against her by counties other than Los Angeles County. So we have represented Sharon in another instance. Why do they need representation? I think it's because of an arbitrary and capricious attitude of the government. Certain regulations exist which can be interpreted differently. I might interpret the regulations one way, you may interpret the regulations another way, and a third party may interpret the regulation a third way. So we have various farmers who we believe are not violating the law, yet the governmental entities believe that our clients are violating the law. And so historically, the government will step in, sue our clients, and we will represent them and defend them in the enforcement actions. And they need representation because government needs to learn that the law as written can be interpreted several ways. It's not necessarily interpreted in the manner in which the government interprets it. And initially, when the Legal Defense Fund formed, we had many, many cases where our clients would have a dispute with the government on how the law was interpreted. And so we would actually sue the government under what's called a declaratory judgment action and ask the judge to declare what the law is. And we have several cases on appeal from some of our declaratory judgment actions where we're still waiting a decision, a final appealable order from a court of competent jurisdiction that would tell us what the law is. Because sometimes we don't believe the government's interpretation.
Well, with the government's appointment in our FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, of former executives of Monsanto, and, with this, what some people have called a wholesale global takeover domination scheme of the world's food supply, and we've heard the phrases of, well, the fox is now guarding the hen house being, all of our food. So who's the driving force behind how the government is choosing to interpret these laws that are subject to different interpretations? Surely it's those who fear people's ability to support themselves and grow their own foods, whether it be in a healthy or sustainable manner or not. How many of your clients have voiced that opinion to you?
Probably every single one of them. And that's probably the case, but who it is, that's given the marching orders, so to speak, I have no idea. And that's really the $64,000 question for me. What's driving this? Who has so much to fear that you can grow your own food, or I can grow my own food, or you can, slaughter a pig and make some bacon out of it and then sell it to your neighbor. You know, who's so fearful about that?
Of Little House on the Prairie, basically. What does a farmer say to you? I'm in fear of my own existence. I'm in fear of going to jail because of the corn I'm growing that's from non-GMO seed. I'm in fear of them coming and getting me because I'm raising my chickens. Can you give me any specific examples? You know, are you at liberty to discuss those? I know you obviously, provide legal counsel. I don't want to be too invasive here, but tell me what you can just give us some tidbits, please.
My clients are not afraid. That's why they're being sued by these state and local and federal governments.
And you're not afraid of representing them. You get an attaboy for that. Thank you. Yeah.
I actually used to be a prosecutor for 14 years. I worked for the state of Ohio as a senior attorney general, and I prosecuted polluters for 14 years. My client in the attorney general's office was the Ohio EPA. So I know how government works. I know how the enforcement process works. I've done administrative cases, I've done civil cases, I've done criminal cases. I've been there with our BCI agents and our EPA Special Investigation Unit agents when we've executed search warrants. I've tried to put people in jail and done grand juries, and so I know the system and I know how it works. And I know that the Legal Defense Fund, because we've been pushing back for 5 years, is having an effect now. Government is starting to think twice before they just willy-nilly go into somebody's house, try to confiscate, equipment, property, food, and try to bring an enforcement action against our clients, because they know that our clients now are represented by, good legal representation in the form of the Legal Defense Fund. So things are changing a little bit finally after 5 years.
I mean, let's talk about that fear factor. Without knowing that you exist, surely there is a greater fear for these people. And by the time they come and enlist your help and have enrolled in your program, which is amazing, they've now mastered that fear, and you're there to represent them. So, I mean, there's obviously a whole lot more people who need to find out about this because, like I said, people are just going to get hysterical about, gee, well, am I allowed to do this? Can I grow my own tomatoes in my backyard? I mean, how draconian does it get?
Right. This Weston A. Price Foundation conference was inaugurated on Thursday with all the chapter leaders who came first. And the Weston A. Price Foundation is based on the chapter model and concept. And at the meeting of the chapter leaders, they wanted me to come and provide a presentation on how they can protect their farmer. And so I educated the chapter leaders on Fourth Amendment issues, search and seizure, what to do during a raid, how to prevent a raid, and what to do after the raid. So we are clearly educating a huge portion of the population now. People are becoming aware of, our existence. Farmers have more confidence to engage in this direct transaction between the producer and the consumer because they know that they've got their back covered by the Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund.
Now, let me ask you this, Gary. How about 7-year-old farmers, kids who are doing it right there in their own schools, with teachers on their own dime, not even being paid, showing them how to grow organic, safe, healthy foods, and then being denied the right to even eat the fruits of their own labor? Would you consider representing teachers' unions who actually, parent unions, groups of just concerned citizens who'd like to let their children legally be allowed to eat the fruits of their own labor?
Sure, of course we would. Yeah, that's the affiliate membership category. They're not an individual consumer, they're not an individual farmer. It's more like an organization and a collection of people. And that shows the enforcement action against a school teacher or classroom or whatever. That shows the hypocrisy of the way the government is interpreting and enforcing these so-called regulations designed to protect the public's health, safety, and welfare. For instance, if a kid in a school wants to grow his own tomatoes or eggplants in school and he wants to consume that food, that's fine. But if he wants to give it to his neighbor, potentially he's engaged in a transaction, and that transaction may require a permit.
God forbid he share the fruits of his own labor.
Right, and if he wants to sell a tomato plant to his 7-year-old buddy in, the second grade, well, then that's a financial transaction, and then the government would take the position that's a sale, and because it's a sale, they definitely have jurisdiction. Licenses, permits, all these other requirements would come into play.
So let's say my 10-year-old neighbor kid, who plays basketball every day and tries to grow his own onions in his parents' front yard, does a little bakery sale and sells some of these onions. Is he a candidate for juvenile hall?
It depends on the government and how they want to interpret and apply and enforce the law. And I've seen instances where government would say, yes, you're breaking the law, little kid. And the hypocrisy in all of that is if the kid who grows his own food wants to consume it and eat it, apparently the food is safe, it's not contaminated. But if he wants to give it to his buddy, then all of a sudden there's a risk that that food is contaminated or unwholesome or not fit to eat, and therefore must be regulated.
What about food banks, where homeless people are getting food for free, and they go to the food bank and someone grew too many, maybe they're in Atlanta, Georgia, and where you can grow, banana trees, and they actually yielded a bunch of bananas, and they want to give them to the local food bank. Is that something where these draconian interests could step in and intercede and prevent that from happening?
Yes, they could, most definitely. But I would guarantee the food bank has gone through the regulatory process and has consulted with the health departments of agriculture and whoever, and obtained the necessary licenses and permits to handle food. And so they probably have the necessary refrigerators, industrial-sized coolers, and all this kind of stuff in order to store the food to make it available to the homeless people. But yeah, technically, if I want to help the poor by making my food available to them, technically the way the law is worded, it could be interpreted and applied in such a manner that, yeah, I need a permit and I need a license to do that.
It could go all the way to the chestnuts on my backyard tree not being fit for a FEMA disaster, right?
Yeah, we had a case actually in New York where there was a court that said that the New York Department of Agriculture and Markets has jurisdiction over every article of food, period. They didn't limit it. They just said they have jurisdiction over every article of food, which technically means I grow food in my garden, in my backyard. I'm subject to the jurisdiction of the New York Department of Agriculture and Markets.
Everyone, not just people who grow to sell it at a local farmer's market or even as part of a CSA giveaway program?
Yeah, that's correct. Because the language in that opinion is so broadly worded, and because it's based on a statutory program and a regulatory program that's so broadly worded, it says the New York Department of Agriculture and Markets has jurisdiction over every article of food. There's another instance in Wisconsin where we brought an action against the state of Wisconsin and claimed that people have the right to buy a cow from a farmer and can consume the milk from their own cow and can enter into a contract with the farmer, a contract which has been around since the 1500s in England and in other European countries.
What do you call that? Common law contract?
It's called an adjustment agreement. And there's cases that have addressed adjustment agreements since the 1500s where we enter into a contract where you board my animal for me. I keep my animal at your farm. You're the farmer, you're the dairy farmer, you know how to take care of animals, you've got the expertise, so you take care of my animal for me. And so we brought an action where we claimed I can buy a cow, I can board it at your farm, and I can go to your farm and get my milk anytime I want to and I can drink it. And we had a judge who issued a decision that said nobody has the right to own a cow, nobody has the right to consume milk from their cow, and nobody has the right to board their cow at the farm of a farmer. So that's what we're talking about.
Good Lord. Good grief almighty.
In the state of Wisconsin, America's so-called dairy land. So that case obviously is on appeal, and we're waiting for a decision from the Court of Appeals. And oh, by the way, I must mention that the judge in that case who rendered that peculiar decision, soon thereafter he left being, a judge, he left the bench, and he started working for a private law firm, and one of the law firm's major clients just happens to be Monsanto. So you have to wonder.
Well, yeah, what would that judge's name be?
The judge is Patrick Fiedler, and he's no longer a judge.
This is a federal district judge or a Wisconsin state?
This is Wisconsin. This is in Dane County. I believe it's Dane County.
America's Dairyland, the heartbelt of America's Dairyland, where people are not legally even allowed to own a cow, let alone keep it in the hands of a cow expert, a cow-raising farmer. If they can't control that, who gets to control that cow's existence? Who gets to control whose cow that is, where it gets to live, how its milk is utilized? Who then gets to control that?
Right. If I can't own a cow, can I own a car? Can I own a house? I mean, what can and can I not own? And who tells me what I can and cannot own?
Yeah.
Are these like God-given rights we have, or are these rights given to us by the government? And it's just so twisted and perverted, because when you read these states' constitutions, it clearly says among the rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness is the right to own, possess, and use property. And so we claimed a cow as a piece of property. I can own it and I can use it as long as I don't harm anybody else. Well, according to Patrick Fiedler, no, you don't have that right. So that's an example of what we're dealing with. That's the mindset of not only the people who enact the legislation, the administrative agencies who are charged with the responsibility of interpreting and applying and enforcing the law, but also it's the mindset of the judicial system that basically just defers to whatever the administrative agency tells the court. So we have a huge battle on our hands. And after 5 years in existence, I think the Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund is finally starting to have an impact. We now have several states where positive legislation has been enacted. We've had some instances where an alleged outbreak of an illness has occurred, yet the state does not rush in and sue the farmer right away. They actually talk to the farmer and see if he is the cause of the outbreak and if there's anything he can do to.
Oh, there was actually some dialogue between the state and the farmer?
There has been, and in the state of California, in fact, there's a woman from Sonoma County, Unique Phillips, who has convinced the California Department of Food and Agriculture to come to the table and talk to us about developing a separate regulatory program for dairy farmers who have only 1, 2, or maybe 3 cows, and administer that program separate from the huge, grade A producers who have hundreds and maybe even thousands of cows. So we're having an effect.
That's awesome. I'm so proud of you. Great to do, this interview with you.